Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Happy Valentine's Day for those who celebrate. We've got a good topic for you today, so let's do it. What's the scariest place you've ever visited? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The basement of the Danvers State Mental Hospital, long before it was turned into apartments, there was a point where in every direction that the flashlight could reach, it was just more darkness, more empty darkness. We found a hallway that, as far as the flashlight could go, was cages stacked on top of each other on both sides. I knew my entire life that my grandfather had been in World War II, but it was made very clear to me from a young age that we just don't talk about that around Granddad, no explanation or anything. As I got older and started getting into history, I started getting more and more curious about his history. I asked other family members, even a couple of his friends from the VFW, and everyone was like, he doesn't talk about it, and that was final. As he got older and fell into ill health, I worried that his story would be lost forever when he died. And then he did die, and still no one had any idea of what he'd been through over there. His story was lost. Then one day I got an email out of the blue from a distant relative. Apparently, someone had sat my grandfather down shortly before he died and convinced him to tell his story. They finally got around to transcribing the recorded discussion and typing everything up all nice and neat, and sent it off to various family members who had expressed an interest in the past. Granddad's experiences were about what you'd expect. He had been in North Africa and Sicily, been part of the invasion of Italy, etc., and then things took a dark turn. Turns out, my grandfather was with the very first unit who discovered Dachau and what was going on there. He was a medic, and he described in gruesome detail just how awfully the people in the camp had been treated, how they kept begging for food, but he had to watch them eat because if they ate too much all at once, they could harm themselves, etc. I won't go into some of the detail he went into for obvious reasons, but let's just say when he described waking up screaming every day for months afterwards, I believe him. The fact that there remains a palpable psychic weight to the place does not surprise me even a little, and I cannot imagine having seen what my grandfather saw, or hell, even just having read his descriptions of it, setting foot anywhere within a mile of the place without incurring some kind of traumatic debt just from being in physical proximity to where so much suffering happened. I totally get him not wanting to burden anyone else with that kind of experience, even secondhand, but I remained immensely glad that he decided to share his story before he died. Tol Sleng Genocide Museum in Cambodia. I also visited the killing fields, but the experience of prison 21 was something else. I can't describe the wall of silence that washed over me from the first cell we entered. The rusted bed with the arm shackles, the floor still bloodstained. There's a whole wall of photographs of the victims, and it really hits you. All these people were with the same staring, traumatized eyes. We paid for a guide at the gate who was so gentle and informative and eloquent. Toward the end of the tour, she told us about her memories from when she was 7, seeing her father murdered, watching her brother be pried from her mother's arms and taken away to his death at a camp, and how they managed to flee into Thailand, just the two of them. Then stationed around the garden are a few older men, selling their memories of their time in prison there, and my brain just sort of circuited. It's not a history book. It's in living memory. It happened a stone's throw away. Hayden, Arizona. A lot of the houses are burned down or abandoned. It's an old mining town that's slowly turning into a ghost town, but a lot of people still live there. I've driven through there out of curiosity. It has a weird, ominous vibe to it. From what I've heard, the police in that tiny town are corrupt, which kind of makes sense. The police headquarters is an old bank, and while the town is falling apart, the police vehicles are brand new. There's a fire department with a completely burned down house across the street from it. How the heck is that even possible? The House of Terror in Budapest, former secret police communist-era dungeon, now a museum, so not personally scary, but pretty hair-raising when you see what prisoners endured, as in solitary confinement cells the size of a broom closet, no light, window, water disposal, or room to even sit. The abandoned top floor of Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth. It looks like something out of an American horror story, completely frozen in the 60s with tile walls and rusted operating tables just abandoned above a busy military hospital. I was 48 meters below sea in a wreck one time when a pretty big shark surprised me. All cool, and usually I love them. It was just unexpected and very large and close. I used my oxygen up a little faster that day. Cape Coast Castle in Ghana. I put castle in quotations because it's a dungeon from the transatlantic slave trade. It was a bright sunny day when we were there, and when we went to the dungeon portion of it, it was pitch black. Trying to imagine all the human suffering that went on there is unfathomable. I met someone on Tinder who catfished me back in 2013. I was a young college student and stupid. The small college town I lived in had a 2-lane road heading in town and another one heading out of it. And on both sides there was nothing but cornfields and farmland. We talked a bit, I got her address, and when I was turning off the main road into a dirt road that was mostly cornfields, when the cornfield stop was a big house, a silo, and a shed, and a little guest house on the property. From my car I could see the silhouette of a man's body and drag waving at me from the window to come in. I backed out of there and took off. Still the creepiest place I've ever been, and the creepiest experience. I spent a summer working at Six Flags Magic Mountain and had been in tower numerous times previously. This time, I was with a coworker who whispered in my ear, "Whatever you do, don't look down the elevator shaft as you exit at the top." Well, sure enough, as you reach the top, there's a 1/4-inch gap between the elevator and the top of the tower. I've never experienced vertigo to the point of falling to the floor shaking and being completely useless for about half an hour. Still haunts me. I used to travel my state frequently for work. I'd end up in these small rural towns and end up working until 8:30 or 9 p.m. most nights. I'd grab a quick bite and then kinda cruise the town randomly. They were always dead quiet by 9:30. At some point, I started exploring abandoned buildings in these towns because I was so bored. One night I drive up to this old abandoned hotel. It was some version of the old Holiday Inn Holidome design. If you aren't familiar with the Holidome, it's a 60s or 70s hotel layout that had a pool, mini golf, arcade, etc. inside with rooms on 2 floors around the perimeter, kind of like an indoor resort. I pried off a plywood board covering the front door and climbed through the broken glass on the other side. As soon as I was in, I was creeped out and felt as if I wasn't alone. Not like teenagers party here, like there's something dangerous here. Listening intently, I didn't hear anything, so I pushed through the lobby toward the inner area. In front of me was the entrance into the dome area, and to the left and right were long hallways of rooms. I pointed my light down both and saw nothing but gloom and the detritus of better days. I stepped into the cavernous common area and was engulfed by darkness and stale, thick air. Very little ambient light penetrated this space, and I felt more vulnerable than I ever have before. I was surprised how intact the space was as I looked around. It was almost orderly. I made my way to the pool area. The fence surrounding it and the gate were intact, so I jumped over. The slide was still standing and clean, which felt off. The lounge chairs were still neatly arranged. I shined my beam into the empty pool. At the bottom of the pool was something weird and terrifying. There was a bunch of random stuff, not trash, but pots and pans, a pillow, pens, pencils, some dishes and utensils, batteries, etc. Just a mishmash. Here's the thing though. It was all laid out in an orderly fashion and covered the entire bottom of the shallow end. It was intentional, but not organized, just rows of perfectly aligned things. Well, I got the heebie-jeebies and decided to get the F out. I vaulted over the fence and stumbled onto the ground. I heard someone effing laugh, a gibbering giggle that I couldn't see. Now I'm trying not to panic and run blindly, but I was so effing scared it felt nearly impossible to keep my cool. I stood and tried to get my bearings in the dark, but this place was huge, and I wasn't exactly sure which direction was the exit. As soon as I stood there, shining my light around, I heard a door open and some rustling movement. That was it for me. I sprinted in the exact opposite direction of where I heard the noise. I got lucky because that was the right direction for the main lobby, where I'd entered. As I burst through the entry into the lobby, I saw movement from my right side. A body flew out of the hallway I'd passed on my way in. A man wearing shorts was only in front of me now, between me and my escape. He looked deranged and screamed, "Mother," and ran at me. I don't know why, but I ran straight at him in response. At the last second, I juked around him like Barry effing Sanders. I hit that opening to the outside without hesitation. When I looked over my shoulder, I didn't see him following me, but I could hear multiple voices screaming in what sounded like rage. I hightailed it to my car and drove back to my hotel. I didn't sleep well, and it was a while until I explored a vacant building again. Sounds like a pretty harrowing tale indeed. Again, if you frequent abandoned places and you start to see things that look organized and neat and clean, you should probably take caution because you're probably not alone. Glad you made it out okay, and that's a heck of a story. The Georgian Terrace Hotel in Atlanta back in '87. The place had been boarded up for years at that point. We were a couple of street punks looking for a squat. We went in at night and explored around, didn't see anybody, so we found a room and bedded down. In the morning, we made our way down to the ground floor and started encountering all the dozens of crazies that made the place home. We'd been surrounded by them all night and never had a clue. They started yelling at us, and we ran out of there scared for our young suburban teenage lives. Killing fields in Cambodia, still bones and clothing visible in the grounds. They would line people up and hit them in the back of the head with a hammer to save ammunition. Pol Pot, the leader of this, never answered for his crimes and died of old age in 1998. I'll never forget the feeling of that place. I once visited one of Al Capone's old mansions, illegally. We were kids, and when we got inside, we could see people coming from different directions with flashlights. We assumed the mob knew, and we were going to die. We ran and hid in the woods for hours and took every precaution we could think of to get back to the car so that the one person who was 16 with us could drive us home. Pretty sure now they were just other kids checking out the place. Gedenkstadt Berlin, Hohenschönhausen in Berlin. Went on a tour there and I'll never forget it. It was a Stasi prison for political prisoners. People were physical and psychologically tortured into confessing. They basically drove the prisoners mad by many horrific methods. Prisoners had to sleep on their back with their arms crossed. If they're rolled over in their sleep, a guard will yell and wake them immediately. Their names were replaced with a number and their identity wiped, took all personal belongings. The prison halls had some sort of traffic light, so when the guards escorted the prisoners around, they would not interact with the other prisoners. They had replaced the window glass in the prison cells with special glass so that would not see the sun. They had some sick psychological interrogation methods, faked a phone call in the interrogation room and told them someone they loved had died or something. Also, there were cells where the prisoners had to stand or sit in cold water for days. That would prevent them from sleeping and sitting. Sorry for bad spelling. English is not my first language. Gedenkstadt Berlin, Hohenschönhausen in Berlin. Went on the tour there and I'll never forget it. An underground hydroelectric power plant. We had to drive through a long tunnel in order to get to that far underground in the first place. I had to stand on a bridge and look 60 meters straight down into a river. The noise in that place was unbelievable. When I was 9, my stepbrother was in a maximum security prison. We'd go visit him every week, and on the edge of the visiting area there was a vending machine. My dad would give me change as a treat and tell me to go get something out of the machine. I had to walk past every single table on the way, and I was absolutely convinced one of the prisoners would follow and kill me while I was standing there deciding which package of stale crackers I wanted to eat. I hated visiting him, and I was terrified of that vending machine. The Concierge in Paris. It used to be a standard medieval castle, but it was repurposed during the Terror. Parts of it feel okay. Marie Antoinette's cell feels really sad, but there's a block of cells on the second floor with just the worst vibes I've ever felt. Google Translate confirmed people were just left to fester in there in their own filth for months, and whatever horrible things you could imagine happening there happened. Jail. Once per year, a jury party was at the time required to participate in a tour or audit of recommendations for the county jail budget. Cops follow you around and complain that they want more money. Meanwhile, the prison looked like it was built, lit, plumbed, and painted in 1943. The conditions for the prisoners were absolutely horrid, and most were kept in group cells with individual cells empty. Looking back on it, Blackwater rafting in New Zealand, hiking down into an underground river system, tubing through it, and emerging hours later. Once you go in, you have to go through the whole way. There's no exit part way. There's no going back. There are passages that go to nowhere. They had just opened it back up after some heavy rainfall. Some of the passages were tight, like float on your back with your face out of the water tight. At the time it was neat and exciting, but now to me it seems terrifying. Marbel Caves Hotel in Wisconsin. We snuck in on Halloween night and had to park in the woods and then navigate them to our hotel ruins. Next time in Wisconsin is scary dark, like can't see your hand in front of your face dark. The whole thing was terrifying. A ton of birds passed by super loud, and it literally sounded like high-pitched "help me" over and over again. A place called Shore Drive in Virginia Beach. Met a lady that called herself a protective spirit and said she could take us to see ghosts. I'm not sure if she called them that though. Being young and full of life, we didn't believe, but was down for the fun. I remember it being a divided road, 2 lanes on both sides, and the speed limit was 35. It was night, maybe 11ish, and we pulled the van off the road. The only thing she said before we got out was when she said time to go, we had to calmly get back in the van. The woods were about 20 feet from the road, and after about 5 minutes there was a glowing orb that after a few seconds took the shape of a person. It was a silhouette, lightly glowing white, and it was pacing back and forth. It could see us as we were seeing it. After a minute or so, another orb came off along its leg and took the shape of another person, but crouched down, walking on its hands and feet. The lady who called herself a protective spirit was dry heaving the whole time. Then she told us to get in the van, and we did calmly. We were going the speed limit, and as we were driving, one of them was walking in the tree line, but moving at our speed. We hit the first property line after the woods, and it disappeared, like hitting a wall. She later told us there was an unidentified demon in those woods, and it had been collecting souls and to never go back without her. I remember there being a road sign put up that said X amount of people have died here since a certain date. To this day, I've never been back, and I've never been able to find anything else about this place online, but I'll never forget the experience. This sounds wild, but true. I ended up hanging out at a bar one night with people who I didn't know were in a gang until it came up later in the night. Things started taking a dodgy turn as they locked everyone in the bar, and it didn't seem safe. Plus, we were all drunk. So I asked if I could please step out to smoke, and just started running because I knew if I followed the river behind I'd end up at my house. Anyway, I hadn't realized there's a split in the river, and I've been running for 2 hours and I'm in the middle of a rice field with a dead phone and no charger at like 3 a.m. and no idea where I was. A rice field shouldn't be that scary, but that night I felt so totally isolated and couldn't find anyone or anything for a really long time.